So I think I am on live, but I need just one mark to start. Maybe if anyone comments or I don't know. Yes, we have one, I think, listener too. Yes. So I think I can start because we have already like students like listen to me. Okay. But I would be happy if I get, yeah, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, hello everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here and to deliver this online lecture to you. And also it's honor for me to be in the same platform with my great teachers from law faculty. That's why I am thankful to our dean and also at law faculty administration and also Firawan Hanım for arranging this online platform for us, for teachers that we deliver our lectures to our students. And I hope my students will join the lecture, English Group 7. Okay. I see just they are going to join. Yes, we all are in a like problematic situation because of this coronavirus pandemic, but I hope it will come soon and we will go back to our normal lives and I will have chance to deliver this lecture in the class to the students because I am that type of teacher that I have to get energy from the students in order to be more active and also more creative during the lecture. But anyway, I will manage it. So it's also like the good thing that we also get ready for this situation, like delivering online and live lectures to the students. Okay. So let me start the topic. Hello, Ilhama. Yeah, it's good actually to see my students here. Yeah, please send me comments and any just marks that I get from you. Okay, so I am just teaching this international humanitarian law course in English Group 7, and we have only had one lecture, and we have talked about the general principles of international humanitarian law, and also we have talked sources, general definition of international humanitarian law. Actually, it was a short lecture because of some organizational issue at the university. We cut it in the middle. Anyway, I saw that a lot of students in the group have many information about this subject because they have taken international humanitarian law topic within international law subject, and yeah, they had a lot of information. However, we are now going into more details and we will learn a lot of aspects of international humanitarian law together. And I hope our online lectures will continue until this stay home period. And also I hope that you all are staying home in order to help our state and also our society. Okay, so okay, let's see what will happen. So we have had only like general information about international humanitarian law, but this time I want to talk about the scope of application of international humanitarian law because this is also the second main topic in international humanitarian law, that you have to know that in which situations we apply humanitarian law, because we know that there are humanitarian law limits the how to say the effects of armed conflict, that it shows to the state parties that even the war has limits, that you cannot choose the methods and means of warfare, any means of methods of warfare, that it shows the parties that there are limitations for the war, for the armed conflicts. Okay, and also we know that international humanitarian law, sometimes we call it law of war or using bell law, and we apply let's say the abbreviation IHL. We apply IHL in time of conflicts, armed conflicts. So it means that state of war applies international humanitarian law, not state of peace. State of peace, we can apply human rights law in other, but humanitarian law is applicable only to state of war. It means that during armed conflicts. Actually, there are some rules. For example, the humanitarian law prohibits to use some weapons for the states during wars, and also during peacetime, the states should also obey some rules. Like, for example, the states should not use manufacture, sale any prohibited weapons during even peacetime. That's why, from this aspect, we can say that some rules of IHL even we apply during peacetime. So, okay, let's say that if we talk about humanitarian law and also scope of application, first we have to clarify what is armed conflict, because we said that international humanitarian law is applicable to armed conflicts. Armed conflict, actually, until 1949, also accepting for Geneva Conventions, there were not any notion like armed conflict. It was the definition of war. In humanitarian law, they were using the word war. Yeah, hello Asmar Khanım. Yeah, one of my great teachers. Okay, so I am a little bit excited actually because it's my first experience. Like I deliver this online lecture, but anyway, I will manage it. So the word actually, yeah, after accepting Geneva Conventions 1949, the word armed conflict came into force. Actually, armed conflict is more general and reasonable word to replace the war, because war is more specific and not every armed conflict is war. That's why, as also according to commentaries, it's deliberate to replace the war with the word of armed conflict, because armed conflict covers any type of armed conflict. However, war is very specific, and not every state is in armed conflict can be considered in the state of war. That's why, starting from 1949, we used the word of armed conflict, which is, I have to say, like also according to commentaries, it's deliberate. So, also, but there are some conflicts that it is similar to armed conflicts, but we don't consider them armed conflicts, and we don't apply international humanitarian law. This can be like internal disturbances and tensions, riots like rebels, isolated and sporadic acts of violence, and other acts that these are also in a similar nature with armed conflict, but we don't apply international humanitarian law here. Only human rights law we can apply, or any domestic law is applicable to this type of conflicts, despite the fact that these are in a similar nature. So also, if we talk about international humanitarian law application, we have to first learn about the classification of conflict. This is very important. The classification of conflict, actually, when I have studied this subject, it was 10 years ago, we were told that there are 3 types of conflicts, armed conflicts. However, now in modern humanitarian law, we accept 2 types of armed conflicts. One is international armed conflict, and the second is non-international armed conflict. Actually, we use abbreviations IAC for international armed conflicts and NIAC for non-international armed conflicts. It is very important to define declassification of conflict in order to apply humanitarian law, because they have special rules to apply, both for IAC and for NIAC. Actually, it is important because the first difference is that international armed conflict parties can be only states. You have to say like high contracting parties. However, in NIAC, in non-international armed conflict, it can be both state and any other armed group or organizations, armed organizations. So this is the main distinction of these two armed conflicts. And also actually non-international armed conflict, we said that one party is state and the other party is in armed groups or organizations. And also we also call NIAC that conflicts that there is not any party like state. This conflict happens only between these armed groups or forces. That's why this is the main distinction of international armed conflict and non-international armed conflicts. And also the differences, we can see some status of the states of combatant or states of prisoners of war is not applicable to NIAC. It's only applicable to international armed conflicts. However, also humanitarian assistance, humanitarian access is only applicable to international armed conflicts. It's not applicable to non-international armed conflicts. However, in any way, we apply customary law to both in order to fill the gaps. However, but we have to differentiate these aspects in both conflicts. Okay, and like every day on TVs, on news, we see that Syrian case, like former Iraq case, Afghanistan case, etc., or the cases in Africa, and you can easily analyze and understand that now there are a lot of non-international armed conflicts rather than international armed conflicts. However, the interesting side is that I have to say that there are more than 600 norms and rules which regulate international armed conflict. However, there are only like approximately 30 rules regulate national or non-international armed conflicts. That's why actually nowadays it's not easy to regulate non-international armed conflicts. It also has some political approaches because actually the states are not in the side to set rules to give certain status to the parties of non-international armed conflict. It's because of their reasonable approach. They don't want to have any threat to their state sovereignty. That's why actually we have now, I said that 600 rules for IX, like 30 rules for NIAX. That's why we have like few rules for regulating non-international armed conflicts. But anyway, I said that I have said in our previous lecture that international humanitarian law is one of the most codified branch of the international law sources of this humanitarian law. So, like, if any questions regarding the definition of armed conflict or like the differences between non-international armed conflict and international armed conflict, you can write here, and this is not a problem for me to answer. I am always home. So can we name non-international armed conflict as internal? Yes, we can call it as internal conflicts also. So I am just going slide by slide because I have prepared this for you. I will send this PowerPoint presentation via email to you, and you will also see all the aspects, even if you can't get from live lecture. You will see on that presentation. So I have said that, okay. I have said that international armed conflict is like happens between two states. So the parties should be states. They cannot be any party like non-state actors. And here, actually, firstly, international armed conflicts like codified primarily in the Hague Regulations of 1907 and the four 1949 Geneva Conventions and Additional Protocol 1. These are related to IAC and also I said always that international customary law. These are the legal sources for international armed conflicts, and also common Article 2 to 4 Geneva Conventions defines that additions to the provisions which shall be implemented in peacetime, the present convention shall apply to all cases of declared war or of any other armed conflict which may arise between two or more of the high contracting parties, even if the state of war is not recognized by one of them. So this is the definition for the international armed conflict in Common Article 2. You can also read, and I will explain now this theory. So it means that they should be in armed conflict or declared war. Actually, it is not an obligation to have any formal declaration of the war. Hi, Shagia. Any formal declaration of the war nowadays. It was actually a little bit more old, how to say, provision. But anyway, the declaration of the war and any type of armed conflict should be between two states. It doesn't matter that the one state recognize the other state or not, the existence of the other state. If international society recognizes the existence of the state, it is enough. It doesn't matter whether the state and started between two or more states. And next, I have to say that actually it's very easy to understand international armed conflict because you know that independent, sovereign subjects of international law is like state, and international armed conflict happens between states, and IHL regulates all the humanitarian interventions, and after starting armed conflict, what can be done by the states, what is prohibited for the states, who should be protected by the states, which actions should be taken by the states in advance, etc. These all are regulated by humanitarian law for international armed conflicts. And also there are some conflicts that it looks like non-international armed conflict, how to say internal conflicts. However, Article 1, Paragraph 4 of Additional Protocol 1 gives international armed conflict status to this type of conflicts. These are that armed conflicts in which people fight against colonial domination, alliance occupation, or against racist regimes in the exercise of their right to self-determination, according to the United Nations Charter and also according to the general principle of international law, such as friendly relations and cooperating among states. So it means that this also can be regulated as international armed conflict, because here the nations exercise their right to self-determination, and they are fighting for colonial domination, for racist regimes, which ICRC actually so, give reference to the racist regimes, such that regimes founded on racist criteria, because sometimes it can bring to misusing issues. That's why this provision has some restrictions, that in order to exercise the nation's self-determination right, for example, ICRC provided that there are certain aspects that racist criteria in order to consider the regime racist, or for example, nowadays we don't have actually a lot of colonial domination in the modern world. It was mostly in the past, etc. But anyway, humanitarian law regulates this as international armed conflict according to the Article 1, Paragraph 4 of Additional Protocol First. If I am not mistaken, internal armed ones. Sorry. Internal armed ones may have two types, like internal armed with international character. Actually, I have said, I think this when I have studied international. Let me. The internal armed ones may have two types, like internal and with international character, and this have participate and with no international character. Right? Actually, no. So before I said that when I have studied this course, we have been taught that there are also internationalized conflicts. Hi Arslan. There are also internationalized conflicts. However, in modern humanitarian law, actually we don't accept this like internationalized conflict or the conflict with non-international character. No, we have certain two types of conflicts: international and non-international conflicts. Before we said that, for example, in Afghanistan, the case was gone to international, was gone, and now we can consider it as internationalized conflict. Before it was non-international, but now we can call it internationalized because there are a lot of other states' interests on the conflict. However, now we don't. And Afghanistan began the war. It was mainly, like clearly, it was international armed conflict. However, after when the Taliban regime was down and were defeated and removed from power, the conflict transformed into a non-international armed conflict. It's actually my opinion after like analyzing, reading all the sources and articles. First, it has started as international conflict, and then after defeating Taliban regime in the Afghanistan, it was changed to non-international armed conflict because it was already within the state, between the state and armed group. That's why it's my now we don't accept this like internationalized conflict or the conflict with non-international character. Only two types of conflicts. So let me see that which slide I was talking about. Yes, I was talking about additional protocol, Article 1, Paragraph 4 of additional protocol first. Please give attention. Welcome. Please give attention to this because this, how to say, Ilham, this is like you can in the first side you can say this like fight for the colonial dominations or fight for a racist regime or fight for alien occupation. It can be looks like non-international armed conflict. However, humanitarian law regulates this with additional protocol 1, which is applicable to only international armed conflicts. And also I have said that we have to run away from this, which criteria we have in order to run away these misusing issues. Actually, I will talk again the IX international armed conflicts, but if you have any questions until now, you may ask. I am here live to answer your questions. And now I am switching to non-international armed conflicts, which is actually not easy sometimes to differentiate non-international armed conflicts and also to give the status non-international to any armed conflict. So here we go for NIAC. NIAC actually, in contrast to international armed conflict, which opposes the armed forces of states, in NIAC, there are in armed conflict like at least one of the two opposing sides is a non-state armed group. So it can be one from one side, state, and from the other side, non-state actor. A non-state actor can be armed groups or armed troops, etc. And also, non-international armed conflict can be between only between such groups, so without having any state party. This is non-international armed conflict. However, I have said that sometimes it's not easy to give a NIAC status to an armed conflict. In this case, we have that help that we have two criteria in order to consider any armed conflict as a NIAC. The first criteria is that the armed groups involved must show a minimum level of organizations. Hi, Aidan. A minimum level of organization. So it should be organized. And the second criteria is that the armed confrontations must reach at a minimum level of intensity. So these two criteria, I said one should be organized group. The second, the armed confrontations should reach at a minimum level of intensity. So these two aspects, two criteria actually helps us to give NIAC status to an armed conflict. And also there are some we have to give some clarifications what is organized armed group and what is tensions, intensity, etc. So, for example, the level of intensity of the violence is determined in light of indicators such as duration and gravity of armed clashes, the type of government forces involved to the case, the number of fighters and troops involved to the case, and the type of weapons used or the number of casualties and the extent of the damage caused by the fighting. All these aspects, specify the intensity of the confrontations that in order to consider this as NIAC. And what about the organized armed groups? I have to say that organization is that there should be commanders, there should be military system, they should have a planned and coordinated military operations, and also they should have internal specific rules that they should also hire new troops, new soldiers, etc. All this means that this group is organized. If we see these two criteria in armed groups or troops, it means that these are already organized armed groups, which is a party to the non-international armed conflict. So I hope it's clear that these two criteria is clear for all of you. So we have said that for international armed conflict, we can apply 1949 Geneva Conventions, also 1907 Hague Convention, and also additional protocol 1 to this convention from 1977. And however, anyway, that we say that customary law. And for NIAC, we said that for NIAC we have limited rules. This one is Common Article 3. Actually, Common Article 3 despite many important rules for NIAC that should be applied in non-international armed conflicts. So Common Article 3 and also Article 1 to Additional Protocol 2nd. So it's also from 1977. These two main legal instruments we can apply to non-international armed conflict. Sure, actually, again, customary law always here for us, there for us to apply. Okay. we said that these two legal instruments. However, there is also a difference in this between these two legal instruments regarding the approach to NIAC. For example, Common Article 3 to for Geneva Conventions define that in order the conflict like should be a NIAC, one party should be high contracting state. The armed conflict should be between states or in armed groups or troops or between such groups. It means that Common Article 3 gives a chance to NIAC that it's possible not to have state as a party. However, to just the armed conflict will be between two armed forces. But Article 1 of Additional Protocol says at least one party should be state or high contracting party. It also bounds territorial, like it introduces a requirement of territorial control and also that reduces the possibility of being two just independent armed groups in any conflict. That's why this is narrower than Common Article 3. And the Common Article 3 to the four Geneva Conventions for the first time covered situations of non-international armed conflicts. It was for the first time that there was a legal instrument in order to regulate the status of NIAC. Actually, it's like Common Article 3 like considers that this can be civil wars, internal armed conflicts that spill over into other states, or internal conflicts in which third states or multinational force intervenes alongside the government. Because there are some non-international conflicts, like even we can sometimes call it multinational like conflicts that they can be the interest of like many nations. That's why we see here that any multinational force may be used in non-international armed conflict. Like to see all the details of Common Article 3, I will send the materials to you via conflicts. So, which like rules it can be? Actually, if we were in the class, I would ask this question to you in order to get your ideas. However, now here I am alone that I have to answer to my question. So, okay, let me drink my tea. We said that Common Article 3 establishes one of the main principles of international humanitarian law. That's why it's applicable to all the conflicts. The first is human treatment with the persons in the enemy hands. Common Article 3 defines it. And without any adverse distinction and also any like discrimination. All the persons in enemy hand should be treated humanly. And secondly, we can say that Common Article 3 prohibits inhuman treatment and also malnutrition, murder, torture, humiliating or degrading. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Firavan. Just she sent me a message, or how to say. But it actually, I lose my mind when I get any message from you or any question. So we said that it specifically prohibits murder, malnutrition, torture, cruel, humiliating, and degrading treatment, or unfair trial. Actually, these all are the principles of IHL, and we apply to NIAC. and common Article 3 prohibits this type of treatment with the persons in the enemy hands, despite the fact that we don't apply POW status, presence of war status, despite the fact we don't apply combatant status, or they don't have humanitarian assistance, humanitarian access. However, common Article 3, that's what I say that please read all the common articles requires that the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked persons need to be collected and cared if it's in the enemy side. Actually, maybe you can ask that in modern conflicts, and also not in old conflicts, it doesn't work a lot. But in any way, I cannot say that all the regulations, all the provisions of international humanitarian law really works. However, we have this how to say provisions in our hand after finishing any war or armed conflict to try any guilty persons to, for example, I hope you remember Tadic case. It was like, I think 3 years ago he was tried in the court, and we all have seen all this process because this happened in our modern world. So we should have these norms that even during the war, maybe they have been broken. They should be broken because it's a war. And we have all written rules, but yeah, the states broke during the war. But after the war, after the conflicts, it is very important for international society to find the person that who commanded the conflict and who killed, who murdered, who ordered for grave crimes, etc. That's why we have international humanitarian law. We have learned the differences between international humanitarian law and international criminal law before in our first lecture. I hope you have learned, I know it. So we said that international humanitarian law happens in the conflict time. And then after conflict, after the peace, let's say, or any just cessation of the conflict, the crimes, war crimes, are going to international under international criminal law. So we say that international humanitarian law defines that which crimes are war crimes. However, it doesn't have any proceedings, any like liabilities for this. Proceedings and liabilities are covering by international criminal law. That's why, and sometimes it may be you cannot differentiate this aspect. Please be careful. Like, I know that you will have questions on this. That's why I have said this. So we said that like like additional protocol or common articles 3 to Geneva Conventions. We said that there should be human treatment with the persons in enemy hands. It prohibits torture, murder, malnutrition, cruel or inhuman treatment, degrading or humiliating treatment, or unfair trial, and to care and collect wounded, sick, and shipwrecked persons. Okay, the third common Article 3 grants the ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, the right to offer its services to the parties to the conflict. So we know that ICRC mandate, we have talked about this, and here Common Article 3 grants the parties to use the ICRC's support in these conflicts. And also, it's actually interesting part of Common Article 3 that Common Article 3 calls the parties of the conflict to come together and to bring all or parts of Geneva Conventions between them in the form of any special agreement. So it means that we cannot apply some rules, but they can bring together in any special agreement the norms and provisions of general Geneva Conventions with by signing a, a special agreement between them. And also, it recognized that the application of these rules does not affect the legal status of the parties to the conflict. So these all are like the requirements of Common Article 3, and which is applicable to non-international armed conflicts, and the parties should obey all these rules. So okay, that's why we actually fully respect its. We have to fully respect its requirements. So, any questions regarding Common Article 3? You can write and send me here, like comment. Okay. Actually, it was my plan to conduct this lecture together with ICRC guest lecturer in the class. However, we cannot do anything because of this coronavirus pandemic. We all are stuck, and I hope it will gone soon, and we will actually realize our plans together with English Group 7. My lovely group and smart students, actually. I remember Samir, Ilhama, Nazrin, Shargia, yes, Jala, Aidan, and maybe I forgot some of them, that you were really smart, and you actually answered a lot of questions during our course. Even I didn't expect actually sometime. Yeah, just go ahead, guys. Yeah, hi Samir. Just I was talking about you also. But I think you have joined late. Okay. So we have talked Common Article 3, that which is applicable to non-international armed conflict. And we said that the second legal instrument is Additional Protocol Second, and we apply this to non-international armed conflict. And I have said that the differences between Common Article 3, NIAC, and how to say Additional Protocol Second regarding the NIAC. Yeah, Additional Protocol 2 applies only to armed conflicts which take place in the territory of a high contracting party between its armed forces and dissident armed forces or other organized armed groups which, under responsible command, exercise such control over a part of its territory as to enable them to carry out sustained and concerted military operations and to implement this protocol. This is Article 1, Paragraph 1 of Additional Protocol 2nd. So you see here that take place in the territory of any high contracting party. It means that this bounds the conflict with territorial aspects. Actually, now it's not actually enforced because almost all the students ratified this protocol or are high contracting parties. Oh, here I remind one thing that I have talked in international armed conflict about Additional Protocol 1, and I have talked about this national liberation conflicts, like the people fight for colonial domination, racist regimes, alien occupation, etc., in order to exercise their right to self-determination. And I forgot to say that because of this provision, now many states don't ratify Additional Protocol first. For example, last time I see United States, because this is a little bit sensitive provision that states should hesitate to do a lot of acts, and it gives the nation to exercise their right to self-determination. Sure, I have said that there are restrictions, but this is the reason that many states don't ratify Additional Protocol first until now. So just 1 minute. Yeah, actually, I have talked about Afghanistan case when Ilham asked the question that about conflict status, like characterization of conflict, however, as a NIAC, we can see that additional protocol second for the first time applied in the civil war in El Salvador during the 1980. If it's interesting, I can send you a link and you can go into details about the El Salvador civil war case in 1980. Yeah, actually they wanted the Euro applicability accepted by the government of the protocol, but accepted that it should be applied because its provisions developed and completed the minimum provisions of Common Article 3. That's why it was applied during El Salvador civil war. So, and I have talked that two main differences between Common Article 3 and Additional Protocol 2 regarding non-international armed conflict. Please give attention also there, because this is crucial in our topic. And also, yeah. What is the next question? Yeah, next, I am just waiting questions from you in order to conclude international armed conflict and non-international armed conflict, because if we have time, I want to take a little bit about occupation also, belligerent occupation, which is also in the scope of application of IHL. So actually, it was and also I have said that ICTY, International Tribunal for Former Yugoslavia, also is a great source for us regarding this armed conflict. That's why I would suggest you to read former Yugoslavian case, ICTY. If you can't, I can send you a source to use and to learn it. Actually, so to sum up this part, I just have some conclusion on the basis of my analysis. So we said that international armed conflicts exist whenever there is resort to armed force between two or more states. There is a resort, just don't forget, like mentioning this. Non-international armed conflicts are protected armed confrontations occurring between governmental armed forces and the forces of one or more armed groups, or between such groups arising on the territory of a state. Actually, nowadays we have some transnational like NIACs, or how to say extraterritorial NIACs. It means that the non-international armed conflict, one of the, for example, armed force is situating or moved to any territory of other state. It means that it's already in a cross-border issue, extraterritorial issue. However, it doesn't give hi Günet. However, it doesn't mean that we have to say this is international armed conflict. This is just, we can say that cross-border NIAC, because the armed force is just replacing in the other states' territory. And here also the crucial issue is that, for example, does that state have consent for intervention to the armed forces in its the sovereign area or not? It's also some crucial issue. It's also the debate topic whether the state should have consent or shouldn't have. If we take Syrian case, for example, it's very recent case that Syrian and Turkey relations, Syrian and Russia relations. If we see, that Syrian relations, for example, Turkey entered Syria, the Syrian sovereign territory, and the fighting with Kurdish terrorist groups, we say PKK. In this case, it doesn't mean that this is international armed conflict. Actually, it happens between Syria and Turkey as a territory. However, this is not international armed conflict. Turkey has conflict with armed group PKK in the territory of Syria, not with the Syrian government. Actually, I have seen in the news, I have read the opinion of Syrian government that calls Turkey to go out. Now it has ceased, yes. Called Turkey to go out from his territory, etc. Yeah, it means that they didn't have consent for this conflict in its area. Yeah, we have to. It's also some answer to Ilham's question that, it can be cross-border, it can be extraterritorial, but it doesn't mean that it is international armed conflict. So, and also we have talked about which criteria should be met in order to consider any conflict as non-international armed conflict, etc. And actually, I would like to get your opinion. To get your opinion on. Yes, thank you. Actually, there are some my relatives coming and writing me, hi. It's not professional at all, but I can't do anything. Yeah. Actually, I am going to finish my lecture. Oh, okay. I will talk also a little bit about occupation. Occupation, like, it's mostly regulated by 1907 Hague Convention, Article 42. It states that territory is considered occupied when it's actually placed under the authority of the hostile army. The occupation extends only to the territory where such authority has been established and can be exercised. It means that occupation is that the occupation placed under the authority of the hostile army. It means that the hostile army enters the territory of the state and occupies the territory, and the main crucial issue here is to have effective control on the within the territory of the state. If they don't have effective control, we cannot consider this as occupation. According to the Common Article 2 to the Fourth Geneva Conventions, 1949, we apply to any territory occupied during international hostilities. They also apply in situations where the occupation of state territory meets with no armed resistance. So they cannot be any armed resistance, but they can be occupation by the state. So, actually, the legality of any particular occupation is regulated by UN Charter, and we know that this is used at Belgium. So, and also I have to say that if we apply IHL to any situation, we have to consider that until getting peace, until getting cessation, IHL should be applied. However, after peacetime and after getting cessation, we can apply human rights law or any just international law, applicable international law we can use. But during the war, during the conflicts, until getting peace, even no current armed conflict, clashes, etc., until getting peace, it is covering by the international humanitarian law. ICTY also mentioned this in its decision judgment. So, what is the main rules of the law applicable in case of occupation? There are certain rules in case of occupation that the occupant does not acquire sovereignty over the territory. occupation is only a temporary situation, and the rights of the occupant are limited to the extent of that period. So occupation is a temporary thing. It cannot be of, last for a long time. So occupying power must respect the laws in force in the occupied territory unless they constitute a threat to its security or an obstacle to the application of the international law of occupation. The occupying power must take measures to restore and ensure, as far as possible, public order and safety. If a state occupied the territory of another state, it should protect the public order, like public safety, safety of the people in the territory, etc. Sorry, I have to charge my computer. Yes. Yeah. And the next requirements regarding the occupation is that the population in occupied territory cannot be forced to enlist in the occupier's armed forces. Collective or individual forcible transfers of population from and within the occupied territory are prohibited. That the displacement of the people, of the persons from occupied territory is prohibited by the international humanitarian law. So we have to consider all. Actually, it's a long list. Even I can't memorize all of them. Just you can read them and like have idea about the occupation requirements, that which should be done by the states, which is prohibited for the occupied states, etc. But the main thing is effective control over the territory. If Article 42 of the Hague Convention 1907 clearly states that a territory is considered occupied only to the extent effective control has actually been established and can be exercised. It means that if there is no effective control over the territory, it means that there is no actually occupation in the territory. So, yeah, this is about occupation, and actually, we see that occupation, like, there are like three basic ways in which the situation, like in which the occupation can come to an end: is withdrawal or loss of efficiency control, genuine consent to a foreign military presence, or political settlements. These three versions can bring to an end any occupation. And this was about the occupation, and I hope actually it is all clear for you. We have talked about what is armed conflict. We have talked about the deliberate replacement of the word war with armed conflict. We have talked about classification of armed conflict, that two types of armed conflicts: international armed conflict, abbreviation we use IAC, or non-international armed conflict, abbreviation we use NIAC. We have talked about legal provisions, legal instruments regarding to dispose conflicts for Geneva Conventions, and the additional protocol 1 for the international armed conflicts, common article 3, and additional protocol 2 for the non-international armed conflicts. And also we always say that, I repeat always, that if we have any gap, if we don't have any codified norm rule to apply, we go to international customary law for international humanitarian law. It's one of the main sources for humanitarian law. And also we have talked about national liberation movements, like which is covered under additional protocol 1. We have talked about the differences regarding non-international armed conflict between common article 3 and additional protocol 2. And also we have talked about the some conflicts that can look like as a nature to armed conflicts, like riots, rebels, the internal disturbances and tensions, but they are not armed conflicts, and IHL is not applicable to these conflicts. This can be solved by law enforcement agencies and also by domestic law, human rights law, etc. And also we have talked about occupation requirements, and we have talked about addition common articles requirements, etc. And I hope you enjoyed my lecture, because I enjoy my lecture. And maybe can the attitude of other countries may affect our occupied territory. What I am meaning, for example, when a state occupy any territory and other states cannot give any objection, can it be legal? What I mean. Actually, it's a little bit unclear, the style of writing question. That's why I I try to understand it. What I am meaning, for example, when a state occupy in a territory and other states cannot give any objections, can it be legal? Yes, it is. Why not? Because every state is sovereign. It is possible. Like the state can occupy the territory of another. For example, the state A may occupy the state territory of B. It like there is not any requirement or any rule that state C should have an objection or shouldn't have any objections. It's not the case actually. I don't know whether I understand your question right or not, but my answer is this. Yeah, maybe you can clarify, or you can ask me later to clarify it. Yeah, I am still here. So I have finished my lecture. I am not sure whether we will continue this or not. I hope that this pandemic will finish and we will go on real lectures in the university. However, until that time, I am ready here for you, dear students, to give you lectures on international humanitarian law. And you can ask any questions, you can write me. I will send you all the materials, all the PPTs to you, in order to spend your time fruitfully at home and not to be bored. Okay, you can watch movies, read different books. However, you need actually to study, because the time is going is running and we cannot coach it. So thank you. Our university try to obey all the social isolation rules. Yeah, stay safe. Yeah, I got it right. Thank you. Thank you, Ilhama. Bye.